Hello, my fellow nerds, Calco here. So, what is CountryHumans? It's like country balls, but instead of balls, it's a mix of people and balls. But there is no canon. All of this is 100% made by fans. So that allows for a bunch of creativity, but it also allows for a lot of things to go wrong. So basically, CountryHumans is if Country Balls and Hetalian had a baby, and that baby was an angsty teenager that just wanted to piss everyone off. I think that this fandom needed to be reviewed by someone from the Hetalian fandom because the critiques you hear from non-Hetalian viewers run along the lines of, you can't personify countries without being offensive. A lot of criticism also comes from people who don't know that you can have something about World War II that isn't about death and despair. Also, I do not speak for all Hetalians. The majority of Hetalians are not going to agree with me, and I am probably going to get cancelled for this. I'm going to have some really hot takes and some opinions some may find controversial, because I like giving people the benefit of the doubt, often to a flawed degree. I think this video is going to be the most fair review of this fandom. I also want to say that I went into this video blind and knew nothing about CountryHumans until I made this video. So this is CountryHumans, reviewed by a Hetalian. Before we continue, I want to say don't harass anyone in these fandoms or any of these content creators I'm going to be showing today. I'm just making an analysis as an outsider looking in. A lot of this info came from people who are in both Hetalian and the CountryHumans fandom. I will be going over both the good and the bad things in the CountryHumans fandom. So, where did CountryHumans come from? Unlike Hetalian, CountryHumans does not have a specific author. It's just a medium for people to make content like Country Balls. Though it is said to have originated from a Russian artist. Ah yes, typical of the Russians to make all the cursed things in the world. It is said that a YouTuber named Splinus can be credited as the founder of the series in 2017. So it's a fairly new fandom. Also, people tell me not to look at the wiki, and I can't now, because apparently it was so bad it got taken down by fandom. But people told me not to use it when judging this fandom, so I will respect that wish. Hetalian is a manga series created by Hidekazu Miruya and adapted into an anime, and a beloved series in Japan to the point where it apparently made it to the top 100 anime ever in Japan. Yeah, that was a thing. Basically, it's if countries were anime boys. Not to be confused with Afghanistan, who did the same thing, but made it all cute girls in the Middle East. CountryHumans is entirely made by fans. Everyone has a different interpretation of what the countries are. For example, Japan could be a workaholic or a weeaboo. Apparently, the main canon was the wiki, but it's gone now, so I guess there are absolutely zero rules now. Hetalian has a limited number of characters. Fans either have to make OCs or wait years for Himuruya to make a character, like Portugal, who took over a decade to make. Sure, there's Neotalia and Necotalia and Mojitalia, but everyone is still disappointed that Poland and Portugal aren't female. And then there will be some aspects of the characters that people will be mad or offended by. Like Poland, or more notoriously, early Seychelles, the one sin of Himuruya I absolutely cannot forgive. Yeah, this isn't okay. Meanwhile, in CountryHumans, you can just make whatever you want or use someone else's version if you don't like the version you find or don't feel like creating one. If one version of Uganda is too offensive or distasteful, you just make your own or find a better one. You're not stuck with one character that you dissent. This is an aspect of CountryHumans that's objectively nicer than Hetalia's. The designs are, of course, drastically different. Hetalian basically just has regular anime people. They'll have some stray hairs or a body part or an item or a part of clothing that represents a city or national park or land formation or something else. And a lot of times they have weird traits that aren't really explained other than the fact that Hime just finds it aesthetically pleasing to draw. In Hetalian, accents are sometimes written in Japanese dialects or verbal tics like aru and ana, which do not translate very well to English. CountryHumans is basically country balls, but with a body and some clothes and sometimes hair and other accessories. They all speak English perfectly good, nobody really writes out the accents supposedly, and they are a lot more expressive than country balls. It's basically if Hetalia and country balls fused. And that also accurately describes the fandom. Let's take a look at some of the popular characters. CountryHumans America is often portrayed with sunglasses, and sometimes has a NATO shirt, and likes to drink oil. Did I mention this series is very political? Because this series is very political. It's a lot more political than Hetalia's America, which is entirely apolitical. Even in the comic discussing the American election of 2016, America somehow remains entirely apolitical. And honestly, the fact that Hema managed to do that is respectable. Germany is often portrayed as a workaholic who wears a white shirt with a tie and glasses. Very similar to our Germany, except this one doesn't have a religion around it. Russia is an alcoholic obsessed with vodka, like our Russia. He also is obsessed with nukes, less like our Russia. He is often portrayed wearing a nushanka, and he is either a depressive emo or the suka bliet meme. And sometimes it's both. Meanwhile, Hetalia's Russia is a fluffy, adorable, two-faced asshole with a tragic past. And that tragic past gives him an excuse to bully and abuse other nations somehow. Due to the simple designs of the characters, it's incredibly easy to make CountryHumans fan art and fan works. Because there is no canon and everything is fan-made, it gives the fans total creative liberty. Fans can portray and design the characters however they want. You don't have to worry about getting harassed if the design isn't exact, or if you miss a button or the complexion is one tone too light by accident. There are no skin tones. Everything's the color of the country's flag. There's no canon designs or outfits. You don't have to worry about making someone out of character, and the only thing you have to get right is the flag. The fandom is more of an outlet to express history and creativity and some stereotypes. And that is the best part of the CountryHumans fandom. That being said, this is also the downside of the fandom. In Hetalia, the characters are more than just stereotypes of their countries. Hetalia characters have personality traits, individual likes and dislikes, personal experiences with humans. Nations have their own opinions and beliefs separate from their government. Hetalia is made all in good fun and has humor at its core. The main goal is to show how childish war is and to just have some laughs. Meanwhile, CountryHumans characters seem to 100% represent politics, government, or historical opinion. You'll have some instances where they feel like they're representing everyday people, but it's mostly pure government and politics. These countries carry out the actions in people form with the same intents as the government a lot of times, unlike Hetalia, where countries' decisions are second to that of their bosses. A lot of people use CountryHumans as a political outlet or a medium to make political cartoons. And that is the biggest difference and the biggest misconception that a lot of people get about CountryHumans. The biggest difference between CountryHumans and Hetalia is that CountryHumans isn't a fan base like Hetalia that surrounds a written canonical series, but rather it's a medium or a platform for people to express their take on politics or history. It's supposed to be political. It's supposed to be divisive. It's an outlet for political and historical cartoons made by random people on the internet. And if it's not for you, it's not for you. If you don't want to engage in a place where politics, dark history, and different points of views may exist, that's fine. It's not for everyone. Take a look at this recent art regarding the invasion of Ukraine that was made the exact same day, within hours of the announcement of the invasion. It was making the rounds on my server, and I agree that it's definitely too soon and really distasteful, and I find it very cringe and off-putting. But to the Russian who probably made this was probably a way for them to express sympathy or remorse that their country is doing this to their neighbor. I still don't think this should be your first idea when you hear a country has been invaded, though, and there should have been some time that passed before stuff like this came out, but I kind of understand where it's coming from. But I don't think things like this were made with the same intention and are definitely in poor taste. And because politics and dark humor tends to be the fuel for the majority of the content that CountryHumans creates, a lot of these works end up as too serious, really edgy works, or works that tend to glamorize and sexualize war and genocide. Also, when it comes to the character designs, CountryHumans seems to be about 65% negative stereotypes, like Israel is obsessed with money, and Jamaica and the Netherlands are potheads. And hey, some people have dark humor, but there's a time and a place for it. You can't do stuff like this and not expect some backlash, or for people to look at you like you've kicked them in the shin. I'm not saying that people that do stereotypes like this should go to jail. People are allowed to have their own sense of humor, but there are some negative stereotypes that can contribute to real-life consequences, like we have seen in the Hetalian fandom, where people took the stereotypes too seriously in the very early fandom and real-life stuff happened. And that's why people are overly cautious about this kind of stuff. While people are allowed to have their own sense of humor, people also have the right to find it rude, offensive, or cringe. Hetalian has a very wide variety of ships. It could be based on history, it could be based on character interactions, or it can be based on just how cool it looks. But normally, Hetalian ships know where to draw the line at how offensive something could be. Maybe back in the day, a lot less so. Goodness, there's so many German sestogencies out there. In CountryHumans, shipping tends to be 100% based on history, politics, or stereotypes. The majority of the ships are also rivalry ships. Nazi Germany and USSR is a big ship, and so is Japan and Korea, which a lot of people find really insulting. Honestly, I think it is very insulting. And it's one of my biggest issues that I have with this fandom. There's also a lot of harem ships for some reason. That's something I don't really see in Hetalian. Even some of the youngest Hetalian fans know to stay away from Japan x Korea and other controversial ships like that. One thing that Hetalian and CountryHumans seem to have in common is the concept of families and incarnations, but they do things a bit differently. In Hetalian, siblings are often other nations, and ancestors are nations that have a different or a lack of recorded history. For example, the Teutonic Knights became Prussia, who then became East Germany, and they are all the same character. Also, instead of the USSR as one character, we have several characters all in Russia's house as the USSR, though Russia is still pretty much the main representative because Russia was the core of the USSR. Hetalian has this roommate thing. In the CountryHumans fandom, each nation incarnation is apparently a family member, or in most cases, each different flag design is a different character. For example, apparently Nazi Germany is not the Germany of today, but actually a relative. A very woobified dad figure that really shouldn't be so, but I'll get into that later. They also have the Face family, but they call it the Britain family and add Australia and New Zealand. They also do this thing where they include organizations like the United Nations and the EU and ASEAN, and they normally act like leaders or sometimes even adopted parents to countries in said organizations. In Hetalian, blood family is defined as nations with a similar culture and language such as Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, or nations whose populations are genetically, linguistically, or geographically tied, like the UK brothers, Benelux, the Italy brothers, and Iceland and Norway. Adopted family, or big brotherism, refers to countries that have a major influence on another nation, like England and his colonies, or China, Japan, and Korea, or France and Italy. That's a unique aspect of the Hetalia fandom that CountryHumans does not have. Hetalia's fandom used to be very awful. Like, we earned Worst Fandom Ever award for a reason. But now things are a lot calmer, and the horror stories of doing Hitler salutes across from Holocaust museums, harassing foreigners, and toxic fujoshiness are mostly behind us. The Hetalia fandom is also over a decade old, thus it has a mix of old and new fans. The veterans in the fandom are there to keep the younger children in check. Meanwhile, the CountryHumans fandom has a lot of children. And this explains the majority of the behavior from the CountryHumans fandom. Children who don't know exactly what the Nazis or the Soviets did. Children who don't yet know how to treat sensitive history or portray things tastefully. The bad side of the CountryHumans fandom is basically everything Tumblr and anti-Hetalia fans think Hetalia is. We have shipping brutal authoritarian regimes, Nazi glorification and fetishization, over-politicization, possibly offensive appearances, and literally basing these characters off of harmful, destructive stereotypes. While I don't think it's offensive to have the character of Mexico wear a sombrero, saying that his hobbies include jumping the American border could be considered as offensive and could definitely rub someone the wrong way. Himaruya goes out of his way to avoid dark history. He focuses on lighter things like trivia, strange occurrences, culture clashes, or even just character interactions. And food. He focuses on food a lot. Like, I swear, half of Hetalia is just about food. And while I see that sometimes with CountryHumans, there are a lot more references to dark and often insensitive history. Like, a lot. And a lot of it is romanticized and even fetishized and often done in poor taste, like the Hetalian fandom did 10 years ago. You'll see stuff like this pop up every now and then in the modern Hetalia fandom, but it's kind of rare and very, very frowned upon. You will get cancelled if you put something like this in the Hetalia fandom. Speaking of which... Alright, now let's talk about the stormtrooper in the room. All the damn Nazi art. Seriously, look at this. I get that in some instances they replaced the swastikas with crosses like Hetalia did in the only place they showed the flag, but there are still plenty of instances where that's very much not the case. I mean, I don't like any Nazi art relating to Hetalia's Germany because not only is it incredibly out of character, it's just distasteful and something that doesn't have a place in such a light-hearted comedic series. Milky Way Studios says it very well. Think of it this way. Hima is trying his best to stay as respectful to history as possible while still making fun of it. We have seen it numerous times with countries not necessarily agreeing with what their bosses are saying, and implying Hitler's presence, but never actually showing his face. The CountryHumans fandom is making the Nazis in fan art look badass and cool. The fandom also follows the headcanons that past versions of the countries are their parents and grandparents. So Nazi Germany is Germany's father, and the fandom depicts him as this misunderstood father figure that just wants the best for his son. According to Kistalila, people make Nazi Germany a comfort character. And apparently the popularity of this character has dwindled over time, thank goodness. And it isn't just Nazi Germany with a bunch of issues. LeafyFox767 talks about this whole debacle with the Philippines. They have this whole Philippines family thing involving the Philippines and their brother, who is the country whenever martial law is enacted, just called martial law. Then there's the dad, who is a revolutionary group, an actual dead general called Del Pilar, and their mom, who's just called Perla, who I don't even know who she's supposed to be. Looking at my What Makes a Fandom Suck video, CountryHumans Fandom suffers from a variety of issues, including a lot of obsessive in children, being a newer fandom, and being a naturally problematic series. Due to the fact that there is no canon, makes the fandom just in a constant state of anarchy. Even if this fandom, fan group, or whatever wasn't run by kids, it would be a mess anyways because of this simple fact. This creates a double-edged sword, giving fans unlimited creative freedom to make whatever they want through this medium, and sometimes it can produce something cool. Other times, it can be yikes. And believe me, I know what yikes looks like. I used to be yikes. But the most important part is that these kids will grow up and grow out of it. I mean, I've changed a lot in the past year, and that involved me changing the people that I surround myself with. Which brings me to another point. The people in this fandom keep producing this kind of content because they keep getting affirmation from those in their community. And when they eventually do move on to other fandoms, they'll interact with other people and realize, oh wow, I was cringe. However, I think the kids are only part of the fandom's issues. And the other half is an issue that's prevalent in the Hetalian fandom too, but is dealt with very differently. I think the other half has to deal with the multiple nationalities in the fandom. Specifically, how many Easterners are in the fandom. And by Easterners, I mean everyone between Poland and Japan, excluding Australia and New Zealand. But I'm particularly focusing on Russia and Eastern Europe. While gathering art for this video, I noticed that a lot of Nazi art is drawn by Russian speakers, which I find very surprising given the bloody history. And on TikTok and other social media, there are a lot of Russians in this fandom. And that made me realize a very important fact that people in both Hetalia and CountryHumans miss, or they just don't want to talk about it. I've been to over 40 countries, and with different cultures comes different senses of humor, and there are different things that are seen as acceptable and not acceptable. Let me give you an example. This happened to me while I was in Latvia and in Georgia. I went to visit an old Orthodox church, but the sign and/or the babushka at the front says that I'm not allowed in without a head covering because I'm a woman. The men I'm with don't have to cover their heads to go in, and in other Orthodox countries that I went to, like Serbia and Bulgaria, and even Orthodox churches in my own country do not have this rule. And they have the exact same religion. So it's not a mandatory religious rule, it's purely cultural. Luckily, in Georgia, I had a hood, but in Latvia, I didn't. So, what would you have done in my situation? Do you say it's a backwards, archaic rule and go in anyways? Do you call out the sexism? Do you say that they should change their ways because they're promoting harmful gender stereotypes? Or do you wait outside in the cold while your male friends explore the church and take pictures for you? I chose the last option because I didn't want to cause a scene or be seen as disrespectful and ignorant. It's a part of their culture that can be seen as offensive or regressive where I'm from, but to them it's just a part of their culture and it's how they've grown up. And coming into their space and telling them that it's offensive and backwards and that they should change is just going to open up a can of worms. You can say that I'm not being a good feminist by being complicit, but to them, it's just a means of respect. Or in the case of CountryHumans, it's just a joke. It's 100% a totally sexist rule. But I complied anyways, because it's not a big deal to me. By all means, there are places that use the "it's my culture" excuse to do shitty things like abuse their wives and children, and that is inexcusable. But the question is, where do you draw the line? What is sexism and racism, and what's just a part of their culture? Was me being turned away from that church egregious discrimination, or was it just a minor, annoying inconvenience? What is offensive, and what is a different sense of humor? Are we telling people to respect others according to our standards? Or are we enforcing our version of what's offensive on the rest of the world? And it goes both ways too. My Soviet Union memes did not fly well in Germany, and I lived in the Vesi part. Countries like Korea, Poland, Serbia, even some parts of Germany, I faced this kind of culture shock where small things that we may find offensive just aren't. And small things that we find normal might be offensive to them. I promise I'll get to the point. I enjoy country balls every now and then. I really love a channel called Arts Animations. He's a Belarusian YouTuber who animates country balls, but there's some humor that would not go over well in the USA and Canada. And country balls and country humans kind of share the same sense of humor. The best way to describe it is edgy humor that isn't really politically correct and has basically no limits. And this type of humor is much more common among the youth than older generations. So it's more likely you'll find teens with this humor. There's a lot of gopnik, simple stereotype humor just like this that I see in Eastern European content creators that I follow. Not all this Nazi stuff, I don't follow people that do stuff like that. I'm not trying to say that Easterners are racist Nazi glorifiers, nor am I condoning these works. I'm not saying that people from this part of the world are the problem. I love my Eastern European and Asian fans and friends. I love having a diverse fandom and community. I'm saying their humor and the way that they portray things may be different from how we are used to here in the West. That isn't to say that all from these regions are less politically correct than Westerners and vice versa. It's just a different type of humor that's common in this part of the world. It's the same sense of humor I had when I started this channel. Not the Nazi stuff, but everything else. And my Western viewers beat that out of me. But when you grow up surrounded by that kind of humor and with those kinds of people, it's an entirely different world. I honestly think this is what happens to a lot of Eastern European and Asian content creators. Especially the Polish ones in the Hetalian fandom. A lot of countries have different takes on their bad history. While most Americans and Germans will freak out over anything with a swastika on it, someone from another country may just shrug and say it's just a part of their history. There are countries where drawing art like this isn't seen as glorifying Nazis. What's seen as glorification in our eyes may not be the intention. Do not call me a Nazi sympathizer. I am definitely not condoning any of this. And it's not just the CountryHumans or Hetalian fandoms. Japanese, Korean, and Chinese creators get called out for similar stuff in other fandoms too. But by all means, stuff like this, absolutely offensive, should definitely not be allowed. I think no matter where you are in the world, this stuff is still considered offensive. These culture shocks occur in the CountryHumans and Hetalian fandom often, and perhaps everything is lost in translation as cultures clash. And there really isn't any way to fix it because there's a lot of people that think this is normal and doesn't need to be fixed. And who are we to define what normal is? Does normal equal Western? Are they being offensive? Or is the West being too sensitive? Do cultural differences make stuff like this okay? Is cultural diversity itself bad for fandoms? Who gets to decide what is and isn't okay? Whose culture and whose sense of humor do we adhere to? Is it ignorant of the West to try to force its values on the East without even considering their values? Or should the East just change and adapt to fit the West because clearly the West is a step ahead of the East? Until the internet confronts these questions, this is just going to keep happening. The CountryHumans fandom isn't too different from Hetalia's early fandom with all the kids and anarchy and ship bashing and Nazi stuff, but it's still a little bit tamer because it mostly stays on the internet. Unlike the old Hetalian fandom that affected people in real life numerous times. And just like Hetalian, all the bad stuff is kind of toning down, and most of the bad stuff is just cringy content, which is easy to avoid with a don't like, don't read. But I still think the lack of research on a lot of things is really bad. And that's prevalent in this fandom in the form of uwooifying Nazism and shipping things like Israel x Palestine. I just find that really disrespectful and distasteful and cringe. Oh, most definitely cringe. And I personally do not think that is okay. But there are aspects where this fandom definitely gets over-criticized. For example, I don't think a country wearing traditional or stereotypical clothes is necessarily bad. I don't think it's wrong to laugh at stereotypes because stereotypes are meant to be laughed at and not taken seriously. Maybe I'm giving the CountryHumans fandom too much benefit of the doubt here because I understand the audience. I used to be a kid with this kind of humor to an extent. But in the end, I think everything is subjective. If it's not your cup of tea, it's not your cup of tea. And some things are incredibly disrespectful. And there's things that are disrespectful, and then there's just a different sense of humor. And unfortunately, the line between those two is often very blurry. Overall, I expected this to be a video of me just ripping into the cringe of this fandom. And now I kind of like it. Not for the offensive stuff, but for the creative aspect. I see now why this fandom is so appealing. And through my research, I've kind of become a little bit enamored with the fandom. But I think I gave a fairly balanced review of the fandom. At some points, I think I was maybe a little bit too fair. I'm ready for the controversy in the comments, but until then, keep on studying.